Some people spend their whole lives wondering where they truly belong. For Colt Brennan, a towering cowboy in the frontier town of Red Creek, that question had long been buried beneath years of silence. At 6'7", he's known for his strength and his solitary ways. One morning at the local diner, a young woman approaches him with trembling hands. She grabs his arm and points to a crescent-shaped birthmark on his wrist. Then she shows him her own. "This runs in our family," she whispers. Those simple words unravel secrets buried for generations. Could this stranger truly be his kin? And what does it mean for both their futures? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Red Creek, Wyoming in the summer of 1887 was the kind of town where everyone knew your name and most of your business besides. The main street stretched a quarter-mile from the church on the north end to the railroad depot on the south, with a general store, a blacksmith shop, May's Diner, the Silver Dollar Saloon, and Doc Harrison's office filling the spaces between. Wooden boardwalks connected the establishments, kept mostly clear of dust by the sweeping efforts of shopkeepers who took pride in their storefronts. The town sat in a valley surrounded by rolling grasslands that stretched toward distant mountains, their peaks still touched with snow even in July. It was cattle country, though mining operations to the west brought a steady stream of rough men through town, spending their wages on whiskey and supplies before heading back to the mountains. Red Creek served as a hub for the scattered ranches and homesteads within a day's ride, a place where people came for church on Sunday, for supplies on Saturday, and for news any day of the week. Colt Brennan had called Red Creek home for 32 years, though he'd never quite felt like he belonged there. At 6'7" and broad as a barn door, he stood out in any crowd. His hands were scarred from years of blacksmith work, his face weathered by sun and wind, and his dark hair showed the first hints of grey at the temples. He worked at the smithy 6 days a week, shoeing horses and repairing wagon wheels, and hired himself out to nearby ranches when they needed an extra hand during roundup or harvest. He lived alone in a small cabin at the edge of town, a place he'd built himself from timber he'd cut and hauled from the mountains. Inside, the furnishings were sparse but well made. A bed he'd constructed with his own hands, a table and 2 chairs, a wood stove for cooking and heat. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a worn leather journal, the only possession of value his adoptive father had left him. Samuel Brennan had found Colt on the steps of the Red Creek Community Church on a cold October morning in 1855. The infant had been wrapped in a thick wool blanket, healthy and well-fed, but there was no note, no indication of who had left him or why. Samuel, a widower who'd lost his own son to fever years before, took the baby home and raised him as his own. He'd been a good father, patient and kind, teaching Colt the blacksmith trade and the value of honest work. Samuel had died 5 years ago, leaving Colt truly alone in the world. The old man had shared what little he knew about that morning he'd found the baby, but there wasn't much to tell. No strangers had been seen in town. No young woman had appeared pregnant and then suddenly wasn't. The blanket had been of good quality, suggesting the mother wasn't destitute, but beyond that, there were no clues. Colt had made peace with never knowing where he came from, or at least he'd told himself he had. Most mornings, Colt took breakfast at May's Diner before heading to the smithy. May Peterson was a sturdy woman in her 60s, with silver hair she kept pinned up and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She'd run the diner for 30 years, and her biscuits and gravy were legendary throughout the territory. She had a kind word for everyone, and a good memory for how each customer liked their coffee. The diner occupied a long, narrow building with windows facing the street. Inside, 6 tables with red check cloths were arranged in 2 rows, and a counter with 8 stools ran along the back wall. The kitchen was visible through a wide serving window, and the smells of bacon, coffee, and fresh bread filled the space from dawn until well past supper. On this particular Wednesday morning in late July, Colt sat at his usual spot at the counter, working his way through a plate of eggs and ham while May refilled his coffee cup. The diner was quiet, just a few other customers scattered at the tables. Sheriff Tom Ridley occupied a corner table, reading the weekly newspaper that arrived on yesterday's train. Doc Harrison sat near the window, eating oatmeal and reviewing notes from a medical journal. The door opened, letting in a blast of heat and dust from the street. Colt glanced up from his plate and saw a young woman step inside, blinking as her eyes adjusted to the dimmer interior. She was thin, almost painfully so, with brown hair pulled back in a simple bun and a faded calico dress that had been mended in several places. She carried a worn canvas bag over one shoulder and moved with the careful steps of someone who wasn't sure of their welcome. May approached her with a warm smile. "Morning, dear. Take any seat you'd like." The young woman's eyes swept the room, pausing briefly on each of the customers before settling on Colt. Something flickered across her face, recognition or perhaps hope, and she walked directly toward him. Her steps quickened as she got closer, and Colt noticed her hands were shaking. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but urgent. "Sir, I'm sorry to disturb your breakfast, but I need to speak with you." Colt set down his fork and turned to face her fully. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought, maybe 25, with hazel eyes that held exhaustion and something else. Determination, perhaps, or desperation. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her cheeks were hollow. "Do I know you, miss?" Colt asked, keeping his tone gentle. The girl looked ready to bolt at any moment. "No, sir, you don't know me. My name is Emma Hartley, and I've traveled a very long way to find you." She reached out suddenly and grasped his forearm, her fingers barely able to wrap around his thick wrist. "Please, I know this will sound strange, but I need you to look at something." Before Colt could respond, she pushed up his sleeve, revealing his bare forearm. Her fingers found the inside of his wrist and turned it so the skin there was visible. Just below the base of his palm, a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon was clearly visible, about the size of a silver dollar. It was something Colt had never thought much about, just a mark he'd been born with. Emma released his arm and quickly pushed up her own right sleeve. She held her wrist next to his, and Colt's breath caught. There, on her wrist in nearly the exact same position, was an identical crescent-shaped birthmark. "This mark," Emma said, her voice trembling now, "it runs in our family. My grandmother had it. My mother had it. I have it." She looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. "And unless I'm very much mistaken, you have it because your family too." The diner had gone completely quiet. May stood frozen with the coffee pot in her hand. Sheriff Ridley had set down his newspaper and was watching with interest. Even Doc Harrison had looked up from his journal. Colt stared at the two birthmarks side by side. The resemblance was undeniable. The same crescent shape, the same size, the same position. "He'd never met anyone else with a mark like his, I think," Colt said slowly, his mind racing. "That maybe we should talk somewhere more private." Emma nodded, relief washing over her face. "Thank you. Thank you so much. I was afraid you wouldn't listen or wouldn't believe me or—" Her words cut off as her knees buckled slightly. Colt caught her elbow, steadying her. "When's the last time you ate?" "Yesterday morning, I think." "I'm not sure." May was already moving, bustling into the kitchen. "Tom, help me get a plate together. Doc, check her over." She looks about ready to faint. Within minutes, Emma was seated at Colt's spot at the counter, with a full plate of food in front of her and Doc Harrison taking her pulse. Colt stood nearby, still processing what had just happened. A woman who claimed to be family. A birthmark that matched his own. Questions he'd stopped asking years ago suddenly demanding answers. Emma ate slowly, as if her stomach wasn't used to being full. Between bites, she kept glancing at Colt, as if afraid he might disappear. "How did you find me?" Colt asked. "My grandmother told stories," Emma said. "Before she died, she said I should come to Red Creek, Wyoming, if I ever needed help. She said there was family here, even if they didn't know it yet." She looked down at her plate. She was right, wasn't she? "You're him. You're the one she was talking about." Doc Harrison finished his examination and stepped back. "She's exhausted and undernourished, but otherwise healthy. A few good meals and some rest should set her right." He looked at Colt. "She needs looking after." Colt nodded slowly. He didn't understand what was happening. didn't know if he believed this young woman's story, but something in his gut told him she was telling the truth. The birthmark was too specific, too unusual to be coincidence. "Finish eating," he told Emma. "Then we'll go to my place, and you can tell me everything. About your grandmother, about your family, and about why you traveled all this way to find me." Emma looked up at him with such gratitude that Colt felt something shift in his chest. He'd been alone for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed by someone, to matter to another person. May set a fresh cup of coffee in front of Emma and patted Colt on the shoulder. "You do right by this girl," she said quietly. "She's been through something, I can tell." As Emma ate, Colt found himself looking at his own wrist, at the crescent-shaped mark he'd carried his whole life without understanding its significance. A family mark. Evidence of connection, of belonging to something larger than himself. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Colt Brennan felt something stirring inside him that might have been hope. Colt's cabin sat on a small rise at the eastern edge of town, surrounded by cottonwood trees that provided shade in summer and a windbreak in winter. The walk from the diner took 15 minutes, and Emma stayed close to his side, glancing behind them several times as if expecting to see someone following. "Are you in some kind of trouble?" Colt asked. Emma hesitated before answering.
"I might be."
"I'm not entirely sure yet." Inside the cabin, Colt gestured to one of the chairs at his small table while he poured water from a pitcher into 2 tin cups. The space felt even smaller with another person in it, and he found himself conscious of the sparse furnishings, the plain walls, the absence of any personal touches that might make the place feel like a home rather than just somewhere to sleep. Emma set her canvas bag on the floor beside her chair and pulled out a small cloth-wrapped bundle. Her hand still trembled slightly as she unwrapped it, revealing a faded daguerreotype photograph in a tarnished frame. She placed it carefully on the table and turned it to face Colt. "This is my grandmother," Emma said. "Catherine Hartley." Colt leaned forward to study the photograph. It showed a woman of perhaps 35, standing in front of a large ranch house with white columns and a wraparound porch. She wore a dark dress with an ornate necklace, and her hair was pulled back in an elaborate style. But what caught Colt's attention immediately was her right hand resting on the porch railing. Even in the old photograph, the crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist was clearly visible. "She had the mark," Colt said quietly. "She did. And she had a son," Emma's voice caught. "A son who was taken from her when he was just an infant. She searched for him her entire life but never found him." Colt sat back in his chair, his mind working through the implications. "You think I'm that son? I know you are. The birthmark doesn't lie. It's passed down through our family, has been for generations." Emma traced her finger along the edge of the photograph. "My grandmother told me stories before she died. She said her baby boy was born in Wyoming Territory, in a town called Red Creek. She said circumstances forced her to give him up. But she never stopped loving him, never stopped looking for him." "What circumstances?" Colt asked. Emma's expression darkened. "My great-grandfather Thornton Hartley was not a kind man. He was cruel and controlling, especially to my grandmother. When she became pregnant, he grew worse. She was afraid for herself and for the baby. So when the child was born, she arranged for him to be taken somewhere safe, somewhere Thornton couldn't find him. The church steps," Colt said. "Samuel Brennan found me on the church steps wrapped in a wool blanket. There was no note, nothing to say who I was or where I came from." Emma nodded. "She couldn't risk leaving anything that might lead Thornton to you. She thought if she could just survive long enough, she'd find a way to escape and come back for you. But it didn't work out that way." "What happened?" "Thornton discovered what she'd done. He tracked her down when she tried to leave and forced her back to their ranch in Kansas. He kept her there, essentially a prisoner, for the rest of his life. After he died, she had more freedom, but by then the trail had gone cold. She tried to find you, spent what money she had hiring investigators, but no one could locate a baby abandoned in Red Creek in 1855. Colt felt a strange hollowness in his chest. "Because Samuel never reported finding me. He just took me home and raised me as his own. Your father sounds like he was a good man. He was the best man I've ever known." Colt looked at the photograph again, at the woman who might have been his mother. Catherine. That was her name. Catherine Margaret Hartley. She passed away 2 years ago. I was with her at the end. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She made me promise that if I ever had the chance, I would come to Red Creek and look for any trace of her son. She said he would have the mark, and she said he would be a good man because she'd held him in her arms and known his heart. The silence stretched between them, heavy with emotion and unspoken questions. Colt stood and walked to the fireplace, taking down the worn leather journal from the mantel. He returned to the table and opened it carefully. This belonged to Samuel Brennan. He kept notes about everything, the weather, the work he did, repairs that needed making. But he also wrote about the day he found me. Colt turned pages until he found the right entry. October 12th, 1855. Found an infant boy on the church steps this morning, wrapped in a fine wool blanket with a pattern of blue and gold threads. Healthy child, strong lungs. No one in town knows where he came from. I will raise him as my own and name him Colt after my father. Emma stood and came around the table to look at the journal. May I see the photograph again? Colt slid it toward her. Emma studied it intently, then pointed to the background of the image. Look, the curtains in the window behind my grandmother. Do you see the pattern? Colt leaned in close. The curtains were partially visible through the window of the ranch house, and even in the faded photograph, he could make out a pattern of blue and gold threads, woven in a distinctive diamond design. It's the same pattern, Emma whispered. The blanket you were wrapped in came from that house. From my grandmother, the evidence was becoming impossible to ignore. The birthmark, the location, the blanket, the timing. It all fit together like pieces of a puzzle Colt hadn't known he was supposed to solve. If this is true, Colt said slowly, if Catherine Hartley was my mother, then you and I are family, Emma finished. You're my great-uncle, my grandmother's son. Colt sat down heavily, the weight of this revelation settling over him. He had family, blood family. This young woman sitting across from him was kin, connected to him by more than just circumstance or choice. Why now? He asked. Why come looking for me now, after all this time? Emma's expression shifted, worry replacing the tentative joy that had been there moments before. Because I need help, and because I thought you had a right to know about your mother, about where you came from. She returned to her chair and reached into her bag again, this time pulling out a folded document. My grandmother owned a substantial property in Kansas, the Hartley Ranch. You saw it in the photograph. When she died, she left everything to her daughter, my mother. When my mother passed away last year, it should have come to me. She unfolded the document, revealing a property deed. But things have gotten complicated. A man named Clayton Voss has laid claim to the property. He says he has legal right to it, that my family's claim is invalid. I've been living there, trying to maintain my rights, but Voss has been pushing harder, threatening me, trying to force me off the land. Is that why you're here? You're running from him. I came to find you because my grandmother wanted me to. But yes, I'm also running. 3 days ago, Voss and his men came to the ranch. They said I had 24 hours to leave, or they'd remove me by force. I grabbed what I could and left that night. Emma's voice dropped to barely a whisper. I think they followed me. I've seen riders on the trail behind me for the last 2 days. As if summoned by her words, the sound of horses approaching reached them from outside. Colt moved to the window and looked out to see 3 men on horseback pulling up in front of his cabin. They were rough-looking, the kind of men who made their living through intimidation and violence. The one in the lead was broad-shouldered and heavy, with a thick beard and a gun belt slung low on his hips. Emma, Colt said quietly, are those the men? She came to the window and her face went pale. That's Clayton Voss, the big one in front. Colt watched as Voss dismounted and started toward the cabin, his men following behind. There was no courtesy in their approach, no hesitation. These were men who were used to taking what they wanted. Stay inside, Colt told Emma. Let me handle this. He stepped out onto the small porch, pulling the door closed behind him. Voss stopped a few feet away, looking Colt up and down with an appraising gaze that held no warmth. "You must be the blacksmith," Voss said. "Colt Brennan, is it?" "That's right." "And you're trespassing on my property." Voss smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "No need for hostility, friend. I'm just here to collect something that belongs to me." "Young woman named Emma Hartley. She's inside your cabin, I believe. Miss Hartley is my guest. She's not going anywhere." "See, that's where you're wrong." Voss hooked his thumbs in his belt. "Miss Hartley is a thief. She stole valuable property from me and fled across state lines. Now, I could involve the law, make this all official-like, but I'd rather handle it quiet and simple. You hand her over, we ride away, and you never hear from us again." Colt stood his ground. "Emma hasn't stolen anything. She's trying to claim what's rightfully hers, property that belonged to her grandmother and her mother. That's a matter of legal interpretation. And the law in Kansas sides with me." Voss took a step closer. "Look, I understand you're trying to do the right thing, but you don't know this girl, and you don't know the situation. This isn't your fight." "She's family," Colt said simply. "That makes it my fight." Something flickered in Voss's eyes, surprise perhaps, or calculation. "Family, you say? That's interesting. Emma, you hear that? You've been making friends, telling stories." He raised his voice so it would carry into the cabin. "Whatever she told you, it's lies. The Hartley property belongs to me, legal and proper. She's got no claim to it, and neither do you." Colt crossed his arms over his chest, making himself even larger and more imposing. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to get back on your horses and ride out of Red Creek. If you come back, you'll deal with me and the law. Sheriff Ridley doesn't take kindly to men threatening women or disturbing the peace." Voss's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, blacksmith. A big one. This is bigger than you understand, and there are powerful people involved. People who don't take kindly to interference. Then they shouldn't have come to my town, threatening my family." For a long moment, Voss stared at Colt, and Colt stared back, neither man willing to back down. Finally, Voss shook his head and turned back toward his horse. "Have it your way," he said. "But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. That property is mine, and I will have it. As for Emma Hartley, she's got something that belongs to me, and I mean to get it back. You can't protect her forever." He mounted his horse, and the three men rode off, heading south toward the road that led out of town. Colt watched until they were out of sight before going back inside. Emma was standing in the middle of the room, her face ashen. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to bring trouble to your door." "What does he mean? You have something that belongs to him." Emma returned to her bag and pulled out another document, this one rolled and tied with string. The original deed to the Hartley Ranch. It shows clear ownership, passing from my great-grandfather to my grandmother, then to my mother, then to me. It also shows, she hesitated, it shows something else. Mineral rights. The land has valuable mineral deposits, possibly gold or silver. That's what Voss really wants. Not the ranch itself, but what's under it. Colt took the deed and examined it. The paper was old, but well preserved, the writing clear and official. This was what Voss was really after. Not justice or legal right, but wealth. "If you have the deed, you have proof of ownership," Colt said. "In theory, yes. But Voss has connections, lawyers, judges in his pocket. He's been working to get the deed declared invalid, claiming my grandmother wasn't of sound mind when she transferred the property, or that there were unpaid debts that give him claim." Emma sank back into her chair. "I can't fight him alone. I don't have money for lawyers or the ability to stand against his threats. That's why I ran. I thought if I could just get away, find you, maybe together we could figure out what to do." Colt looked at this young woman, his niece, if her story was true, and he was increasingly certain it was, and saw his own loneliness reflected back at him. She had no one else. No family, no resources, no protection against men like Voss, but she had him now. "We'll figure this out," Colt said. "First thing tomorrow, we'll go see Sheriff Ridley and get his advice. Then we'll talk to a lawyer, find out what your legal standing is. And if Voss comes back, he'll find out that threatening my family was the worst mistake he ever made." Emma's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of relief. "Thank you." "You don't know what this means to me." Colt nodded, looking down at his wrist where the crescent-shaped birthmark had always been. A mark he'd carried his whole life, without understanding its meaning. Now it connected him to this woman, to a mother he'd never known, to a history he was only beginning to understand. His quiet, solitary life had just become very complicated. But for the first time in years, Colt felt like he had a purpose beyond just surviving one day to the next. He had family to protect, and he would do whatever it took to keep Emma safe. Morning light filtered through the curtains of Colt's cabin, waking him from a restless sleep. He'd given Emma his bed and spent the night in the chair by the cold fireplace, dozing fitfully while his mind worked through everything he'd learned. The photograph of Catherine Hartley sat on the table where they'd left it, and Colt found himself staring at it as dawn broke. His mother. The word felt strange even in his thoughts. For 32 years, he'd had no mother, just the vague knowledge that somewhere a woman had given birth to him and then given him away. Now he had a name, a face, a story. Catherine had wanted him, had searched for him, had loved him even though they'd never known each other. Emma stirred in the bedroom, and soon she emerged, looking more rested than she had yesterday, but still worn thin by her ordeal. Colt had coffee ready, and they sat together at the small table. The deed to the Hartley ranch spread out between them. "Tell me everything you know about this property," Colt said. Emma traced the boundaries marked on the deed. "It's in Wilson County, Kansas, about 100 miles southwest of Kansas City. 2,000 acres of good grazing land, with a creek running through it. The main house is the one you saw in the photograph. My great-grandfather built it in the 1840s when he first claimed the land. There are also several outbuildings, a stable, bunkhouse for ranch hands. And the mineral rights? That's the part I don't fully understand. My grandmother mentioned there had been a survey done years ago before I was born that showed valuable deposits, but she never pursued mining or selling the rights. She just wanted to keep the land in the family." Emma's finger moved to a notation at the bottom of the deed. "This is what concerns me most." Colt leaned in to read the small, precise writing. It was an amendment to the deed, dated just 6 months ago, transferring ownership from Emma's mother to Emma herself. But there was another notation below it, one that had been added later in different handwriting, claiming the transfer was invalid due to outstanding debts. "That's not my mother's signature on the debt claim," Emma said. "And there were no outstanding debts. My mother kept meticulous records. Someone added that after her death. Voss. That would be my guess. If he could make it appear that my mother died owing money, he could claim the property as payment." A knock at the door interrupted them. Colt opened it to find Doc Harrison standing on the porch, his medical bag in hand. "Thought I'd check on your guest," Doc said. "Make sure she's recovering from yesterday's exhaustion." Colt stepped aside to let him in, while Doc examined Emma, checking her pulse and asking questions about how she felt. Colt noticed May approaching from the direction of town, carrying a basket covered with a cloth. "Brought you some breakfast," May said when she reached the door. "Figured you might need it." She set the basket on the table and pulled back the cloth to reveal fresh biscuits, bacon, and a jar of preserves. "Now I know it's not my place to pry, but word's gotten around about those men who came calling yesterday. Are you two in some kind of trouble?" "Nothing I can't handle," Colt said. May fixed him with a stern look. "Colt Brennan, I've known you since you were a baby. Don't you go trying to protect me from the truth. If there's trouble, the whole town should know about it so we can help." Doc finished his examination and joined them at the table. "May's right. Red Creek takes care of its own. If this young lady is family to you, then she's family to all of us." Emma looked between them, seeming overwhelmed by their kindness. "I don't want to bring problems to your town. Maybe I should just leave, try to handle this on my own." "Absolutely not," May said firmly. "You're in no condition to be traveling, and besides, running won't solve anything." She turned to Colt. "What does Sheriff Ridley say?" "Haven't talked to him yet. That's where we're headed this morning." "Good. Tom's a sensible man. He'll know what to do." May started unpacking the basket, setting out plates and utensils. "Now eat something, both of you. Can't think properly on an empty stomach." As they ate, Doc Harrison picked up the deed and studied it carefully, his reading glasses perched on his nose. This is quite a property. And these mineral rights notations, if there really is gold or silver on this land, it would be worth a considerable fortune. That's what Voss wants, Emma said. The land itself is valuable, but the mineral rights are what he's really after. Doc set down the deed and removed his glasses, cleaning them thoughtfully. I should tell you something. I knew Samuel Brennan well. We played chess together every Thursday evening for 20 years. About a year before he died, he told me something in confidence. Colt set down his coffee cup. What did he say? He said he'd always wondered about your mother, whether she was still alive, whether she ever thought about the baby she'd left behind. He said he'd kept something from the day he found you, something he'd never shown anyone. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would make sure you got it. What was it? Colt asked. I don't know. Samuel died suddenly. His heart gave out while he was working at the forge. In the confusion afterward, I forgot about his request. But it's been nagging at me since yesterday, since Emma showed up. Doc looked at Colt seriously. Samuel said he'd hidden it in the smithy, somewhere only someone who knew the trade would think to look. Colt stood abruptly. We need to go there now. The blacksmith shop stood at the west end of town, a large building made of stone and timber with a high roof to vent the heat and smoke. Inside, the forge dominated one wall, cold now but still radiating the sense of countless fires that had burned there. Tools hung on the walls in orderly rows, hammers, tongs, files, punches, each in its proper place. This had been Samuel's domain, and now it was Colt's. May and Doc waited by the door, while Colt and Emma searched. Colt moved methodically, checking the places where Samuel might have hidden something, behind loose stones in the forge, under floorboards, in the rafters, where only someone who knew the trade would think to look, Emma repeated, watching Colt search. What would that mean? Colt paused, thinking. Samuel had been a teacher, always showing him not just how to do something, but why it was done that way. He'd been methodical, organized, a man who believed everything had its proper place. His eyes fell on the anvil, a massive piece of forged steel that sat on a thick wooden stump. Samuel had carved that stump himself from an old oak tree, had carefully fitted it with iron bands to keep it from splitting under the hammer's force. Colt knelt beside the anvil and ran his hands along the iron bands. The third one down was slightly loose, moving under his touch. He worked his fingers underneath and found a small gap between the band and the wood. There, tucked into the hollow space Samuel had carved into the stump, was a folded piece of cloth. Colt pulled it out carefully. The cloth was old and stained with rust from the iron band. But when he unwrapped it, he found a piece of paper inside. Protected from the elements all these years, it was a hand-drawn map, detailed and precise. At the top, written in Samuel's careful script, were the words, "Property of Catherine Hartley, Wilson County, Kansas." Emma gasped. That's my grandmother's ranch. The map showed the boundaries of the property, the locations of buildings, water sources, fences, and pastures. But what caught Colt's attention were the markings scattered across the land. Small X marks with notations beside them, in shorthand he didn't understand. Doc came closer to look over his shoulder. Those look like survey marks. Someone mapped this property very carefully. My grandmother must have sent this to Samuel, Emma said. Maybe hoping he would bring you home, show you where you came from. But there was more. At the bottom of the map, barely visible, was another notation, this one fresher than Samuel's writing. It was in a different hand, added more recently, and it referenced an amendment to the property deed, changing ownership from Catherine Hartley to someone else. This is the same amendment that's on my deed, Emma said, pointing to the date. But this one shows something different. It shows who really made the change. The signature at the bottom was clear, Clayton Voss. He amended the deed, Colt said slowly. He forged documents to make it look like he had legal claim to the property. This map proves it. It shows the original boundaries and ownership before he changed them. But why would your father have this? Emma asked. He must have been investigating, Doc said. Maybe Catherine contacted him, told him what was happening with her property. Maybe Samuel was trying to help her. May spoke up from the doorway. Samuel took a trip to Kansas about 2 years before he died. Said he had business to attend to. He was gone for nearly a month. When he came back, he was troubled, quiet. Wouldn't talk about what he'd seen or done there. He went to find Catherine, Colt said, the pieces falling into place. She must have reached out to him, told him about me, asked for help. He went to Kansas to see her and get this map. But why didn't he tell you? Emma asked. Because Catherine was already dying, Doc said quietly. Samuel mentioned once that he'd tried to track down your birth mother, but found only sadness. I think he met Catherine, learned the truth, but knew she wouldn't live long enough to reunite with you. He kept the map because it was proof of her property rights, proof that could help her descendants. Colt carefully folded the map and tucked it into his vest pocket. This changes everything. We have proof that Voss forged the deed amendment. We can challenge his claim. We need a lawyer, Emma said. Someone who understands property law and can file the right paperwork. Sheriff Ridley arrived at the smithy just as they were preparing to leave. He'd heard about the confrontation with Voss and had questions of his own. When they showed him the map and explained the situation, his expression grew serious. This is beyond my authority, Ridley said. Property disputes across state lines, forged documents, threatening behavior. You need legal representation, and you need it fast. Voss isn't going to give up just because you have evidence. Men like him don't play fair. Who can we talk to? Colt asked. There's a lawyer in Cheyenne, name of Marcus Webb. He handles complex property cases and has a good reputation. If anyone can help you navigate this, it's him. Ridley pulled out his pocket watch and checked the time. The next train to Cheyenne leaves this afternoon. You could be there by evening. I'll go, Colt said immediately. Emma should stay here where it's safe. No, Emma said firmly. This is my fight as much as yours. I'm going with you. Colt started to argue, but May cut him off. The girl's right. She's the legal heir. She needs to be there to meet with the lawyer. Besides, you can't protect her if you're in Cheyenne and she's here. It was decided. They would take the afternoon train to Cheyenne, meet with Marcus Webb, and hopefully start the legal process to reclaim the Hartley property and stop Clayton Voss's fraudulent claim. As they prepared to leave, Doc pulled Colt aside. Be careful. Men who forge legal documents don't stop there. If Voss realizes you have that map, he'll do whatever it takes to get it back. I know. But Emma deserves justice. My mother deserves justice. And if Samuel went to all this trouble to preserve this evidence, then I owe it to him to see this through. Doc nodded and handed Colt a small leather pouch. Medicine for Emma. Make sure she keeps her strength up. And Colt, I'm glad you found family. Samuel would have been glad too. Back at the cabin, Colt packed a small bag with essentials while Emma gathered her things. The photograph of Catherine, the deed and the map went into a leather satchel that Colt slung across his chest. These were precious now, evidence that could change everything. As they walked to the train station, Colt found himself looking at Red Creek with different eyes. For 32 years, this had been his home, but he'd never quite felt he belonged here. Now, knowing where he came from, knowing he had family and history and a connection to something larger than himself, the town felt different. It felt like a place he could leave and return to, a true home rather than just a place to exist. The train platform was busy with afternoon travelers, ranchers heading to Cheyenne for supplies, miners returning from claims in the mountains, families visiting relatives. Colt bought 2 tickets, and they boarded a passenger car, finding seats near the back where they could watch the other passengers. As the train pulled out of the station, Emma looked out the window at the Wyoming landscape rolling past. Do you think we can win? Against Voss and his lawyers and all his resources? I don't know, Colt said honestly. But we have the truth on our side. And sometimes that's enough. Emma touched the crescent-shaped birthmark on her wrist. My grandmother used to say this mark was a sign of resilience, that everyone who carried it had survived something difficult and would survive more. She said the Hartley family might bend, but we never break. Colt looked at his own matching mark. Then we'll show Clayton Voss what Hartley resilience looks like. The train carried them east toward Cheyenne, toward lawyers and legal battles and uncertain outcomes. But for the first time in his life, Colt wasn't alone. He had family, he had purpose, and he had a fight worth fighting, whatever came next. They would face it together. The train journey to Cheyenne took 4 hours, and with each mile, Colt felt the weight of what they were attempting settle more heavily on his shoulders. Emma dozed fitfully against the window, exhaustion still claiming her, despite her determination to stay alert. Colt kept watch, studying the other passengers, looking for anyone who might be following them or reporting back to Voss. When they arrived in Cheyenne just after sunset, the city felt overwhelming after the quiet of Red Creek. Streets bustled with activity. Saloons and hotels lit up against the gathering darkness. The smell of coal smoke and horses thick in the air. Colt secured them rooms at a modest boarding house near the center of town, ensuring Emma had a proper bed and a door that locked. "We'll find Marcus Webb first thing in the morning," Colt told her as they stood in the narrow hallway between their rooms. "Get some real rest tonight. You're safe here." But sleep eluded both of them. Colt lay awake in his small room, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the city, thinking about Catherine Hartley and the life she'd lived. A woman who'd been trapped in a cruel marriage, forced to give up her child, searching for him until she died. He wished he could have met her, told her he'd turned out all right, that Samuel had been a good father. Morning brought a knock at his door before dawn. Colt opened it to find May standing in the hallway, travel bag in hand and a determined expression on her face. "May, what are you doing here? Someone needs to look after you two, and I decided it should be me." She pushed past him into the room. "I took the late train last night. Now get yourself presentable. We're going to see that lawyer as soon as his office opens." True to her word, May had everything organized. By the time Marcus Webb's law office opened at 8 o'clock, all 3 of them were waiting on the steps. Webb himself was a man in his 50s, with silver hair and sharp grey eyes that missed nothing. He listened to their story with growing interest, examining each piece of evidence they laid before him. "This is quite remarkable," Webb said, studying the map Samuel had hidden. "You have the original deed, a detailed property map showing the true boundaries, and evidence of forgery in the amendment. That's a strong foundation for a case. Can we win?" Emma asked. "That depends on many factors. How good are Voss's lawyers? What judges will hear the case? How much influence does he have in Kansas?" Webb set down the map and folded his hands. "But yes, I believe you have a legitimate claim. The question is whether we can prove it before Voss does something desperate." "What do you mean?" Colt asked. "Men who go to the trouble of forging legal documents usually have backup plans. If he realizes you're mounting a legal challenge, he may try to destroy evidence, intimidate witnesses, or worse." Webb looked at Emma seriously. "Has he threatened violence?" "He's threatened to remove me from the property by force. His men," Emma hesitated. "They're not gentle people," Webb nodded grimly. "Then we need to move quickly and carefully. First, we file an injunction preventing any changes to the property until the case is resolved. Second, we request a full investigation of the deed amendment. Third, we establish your identity and your direct descent from Catherine Hartley." "That's where it gets complicated," Emma said. She explained about being adopted by Catherine's daughter, about not knowing until recently that she wasn't a blood Hartley. Webb listened carefully, then turned to Colt. "And you're Catherine's biological son, correct? Do you have proof of that beyond the birthmark?" "Samuel's journal documents the day he found me. The blanket I was wrapped in matches the pattern in Catherine's house. And there's this." Colt pulled out the leather journal from his bag. Samuel kept notes about everything, including a visit he made to Kansas 2 years before he died. Webb read through Samuel's entries, his expression growing more animated. "This is excellent. Samuel met with Catherine Hartley directly. He documents her confirming you as her son. This establishes you as a blood heir with full legal standing." He looked up. "Do you know what this means? If you're Catherine's son, you have as much claim to the property as Emma does, possibly more, since you're a direct descendant and she's adopted." The words hung in the air. Colt looked at Emma, saw the fear flash across her face. "If he wanted to, he could claim the entire property for himself. That's not why we're here, Colt said firmly. Emma is family. Whether by blood or by choice, she's Catherine's granddaughter and she's my niece. We're not fighting each other for this property. We're fighting Voss. Relief washed over Emma's face, and May squeezed Colt's shoulder approvingly. Webb smiled. Good, that makes this much simpler. We can file as joint heirs, which actually strengthens the case considerably. He began pulling out papers and forms, his pen moving quickly across the pages. I'll need you both to sign these documents. Then I'll file with the district court in Kansas immediately. They spent the next 2 hours going through paperwork, answering Webb's detailed questions about dates, locations, and family history. May sat quietly in the corner, but her presence was steadying, a reminder of home and the community that supported them. As they were finishing, Webb's clerk knocked and entered, looking troubled. Mr. Webb, there's a gentleman here to see you. Says it's urgent and concerns the Hartley case. Webb's eyebrows rose. We haven't even filed yet. Who is it? He says his name is Clayton Voss. The room went silent. Emma's hand found Colt's arm, gripping tight. May stood up, her face set in hard lines. Show him in, Webb said calmly. Let's see what he has to say. Clayton Voss entered the office with the confidence of a man used to getting his way. He nodded to Webb professionally, then his eyes swept over Colt, Emma, and May with barely concealed contempt. Counselor Webb, Voss said smoothly, I apologize for the intrusion, but I heard through certain channels that you might be taking on a case involving the Hartley property in Kansas. I wanted to speak with you before any paperwork was filed that might prove embarrassing for all involved. I'm listening, Webb said neutrally. Voss pulled a chair forward without being invited and sat down. The Hartley property is mine, legally purchased and properly registered. Miss Hartley here is operating under a misunderstanding about her rights. Her grandmother's estate was settled years ago, and any claims she might have had died with her mother. That's not true, Emma said, her voice stronger than Colt expected. My grandmother left the property to my mother, who left it to me. You forged documents to steal it. Voss didn't even glance at her. He kept his attention on Webb. I have documentation proving my ownership. County records, signed transfer papers, everything proper and legal. What Miss Hartley has are old family stories and wishful thinking. Colt leaned forward. We have the original deed. We have a detailed property map that shows your amendment was forged. And we have witness testimony from a man who met with Catherine Hartley before she died. Now Voss did look at him, and there was calculation in his eyes. Mr. Brennan, the foundling from Wyoming, I have to admit, this is an interesting twist. Emma's convinced you that you're some long-lost relative, has she? That's quite a story. It's not a story, Colt said evenly. It's the truth, and we can prove it. Voss studied Colt for a long moment, then surprised everyone by pulling up his own right sleeve. There, on his wrist, in nearly the same position as Colt's and Emma's birthmarks, was a crescent-shaped mark, smaller than theirs, slightly different in shape. But unmistakably similar, the Hartley mark, Voss said quietly. I have it too, because Thornton Hartley was my father, same as he was Catherine's husband. That makes me as much a heir to that property as anyone. The revelation hit like a physical blow. Emma gasped. May's hand went to her mouth. Even Webb looked surprised. You're lying, Emma said. Thornton had no other children. Thornton had a mistress for 20 years. A woman named Sarah Voss. She was my mother, and yes, Thornton was my father, though he never acknowledged me publicly. When he died, he left everything to Catherine. Nothing to me, nothing to my mother. We lived in poverty while the Hartley ranch prospered. Voss's voice was bitter. So yes, I claimed what should have been mine all along. That property belongs to Thornton's blood, and I am Thornton's blood. Webb cleared his throat. If what you're saying is true, Mr. Voss, you would have needed to establish paternity legally and file a proper inheritance claim. Did you do that? I tried. For years I tried. But Catherine blocked me at every turn. She had lawyers, money, influence. I was just the bastard's son, not worth acknowledging. Voss stood abruptly. So I took matters into my own hands. The property is mine now, and I don't care what old papers you dig up. Possession is 9/10 of the law. Actually, Webb said mildly, that's not quite how property law works. But I appreciate you coming by to explain your position. It will be very helpful when we present our case to the judge. Voss's eyes narrowed. You're making a mistake, Counselor. All of you. That property is worth a fortune in mineral rights alone. There are powerful people who have invested in my claim, people who don't like losing money. If you pursue this, you'll find yourselves facing more opposition than you can handle. Is that a threat? Colt asked, standing to his full height. It's a warning, one I'm offering out of courtesy. Voss moved toward the door. Miss Hartley, Mr. Brennan, walk away now. Take whatever money you need to start over somewhere else and forget about Kansas. Otherwise, this ends badly for everyone. We're not walking away, Emma said firmly. Voss sighed. Then you've made your choice. He opened the door, then paused and looked back at Colt. For what it's worth, I believe your story. The birthmark doesn't lie. Catherine did have a son, and you're probably him. That means we're half-brothers, you and I. Same father, different mothers. A strange expression crossed his face, something that might have been regret. In another life, maybe we could have been family, but not in this one. He left, and the silence he left behind was heavy with implications. May was the first to speak. Well, that was illuminating. He admitted to forging the documents, Webb said, making notes. That's useful, though we'd never get him to repeat it under oath. He's Thornton's son, Emma said, still processing. He has a legitimate grievance against my grandmother. Against the whole family, Colt sat back down heavily. The idea that he and Voss were related, that they shared a father, was almost too much to absorb. Thornton Hartley, a man he'd never met, had apparently left a trail of pain and broken families across Kansas and Wyoming. Does this change anything? Colt asked Webb. Legally, it complicates matters. If Voss can prove paternity, he may have a legitimate inheritance claim alongside yours and Emma's. But that doesn't excuse forgery or theft. And it doesn't give him the right to threaten people or seize property illegally. Webb tapped his pen against his desk. If anything, this makes me more determined to see justice done. The Hartley estate should be settled properly according to law, with all legitimate heirs receiving their fair share. All legitimate heirs, Colt repeated. You mean divide the property 3 ways? If that's what the law requires, yes. Catherine's estate should go to her legal descendants. That's you and Emma. Thornton's estate, if he died with unpaid obligations to his illegitimate son, is a separate matter. But it's possible a judge would rule that Voss deserves some compensation. Emma shook her head. My grandmother would hate that. After everything Thornton put her through, to have his illegitimate son profit from her land, what your grandmother would have wanted, May interrupted gently, was justice and peace. If Voss truly is Thornton's son, then he's another victim of that man's cruelty, just like Catherine was. Maybe the answer isn't to fight each other, but to find a fair solution. Colt looked at May with new appreciation. She was right, of course. Catherine had spent her life suffering under Thornton's control. Breaking free of that legacy meant not perpetuating the cycle of pain and revenge. Let's do this right, Colt said. File the injunction, investigate the forgery, establish all the rightful heirs. Whatever the judge decides, at least it will be legal and fair. Webb nodded approvingly. That's the right approach, though I should warn you this case just got much more complicated. And Voss's mention of powerful people concerns me. If there really are investors involved, they may apply pressure through legal and extra-legal means. What do we do? Emma asked. You stay visible and public. Make it clear that you're pursuing this through proper legal channels. That makes it harder for anyone to harm you without consequences. And you stay together, there's safety in numbers. Webb gathered his papers. I'll file these documents today. Within a week we should have a hearing date. In the meantime, do not go back to Kansas. Stay in Wyoming, where you have community support. They left Webb's office with more questions than answers, but also with a sense of progress. May insisted they have a proper meal, and they found a restaurant that served pot roast and potatoes, simple food that reminded Colt of home. As they ate, Emma was quiet, pushing food around her plate. Finally, she looked up at Colt. Do you think Voss was telling the truth about being Thornton's son? The birthmark suggests he was. It's too specific to be coincidence. Then he and I are what? Cousins of some kind? And you're his half-brother? Emma's voice was small. This family is more complicated than I ever imagined. Family always is, May said pragmatically. Blood doesn't make people good or bad. It's what they choose to do that matters. Voss has made some poor choices, seems to me. But maybe there's still time for him to make better ones. That evening, May insisted on taking the train back to Red Creek. Someone needs to keep the diner running, and I've been gone long enough. You two stay here until Mr. Webb says otherwise. And Colt, you keep that girl safe. She's counting on you. After May left, Colt walked Emma back to the boarding house. The streets were quieter now, lamps lit along the main thoroughfares, the day's business winding down. Emma seemed lost in thought, and Colt gave her space to process everything they'd learned. At her door, she turned to him. Thank you. For believing me, for helping me, for her voice caught. For being family when I had no one left. You gave me something too, Colt said. Answers, a history. A mother I never knew, but who loved me anyway. He pulled out the silver locket May had given him back in Red Creek and opened it carefully. Inside was a lock of baby hair, his hair, kept by Catherine all those years. May gave me this before we left. She said Catherine gave it to her 30 years ago. Asked her to keep it safe in case her son ever came back to Red Creek. Emma's eyes filled with tears. She never stopped looking for you. Never stopped hoping. I know. And now I'm going to make sure her legacy is protected, that the property she worked so hard to keep in the family stays where it belongs. He closed the locket and tucked it back into his pocket. Sleep well, Emma. Tomorrow we start planning our next move. In his own room, Colt lay awake thinking about everything that had happened in the past 2 days. His life had been quiet, predictable, and lonely. Now it was complicated, uncertain, and full of purpose. He had a niece who needed him. He had a history he was only beginning to understand. And he had an adversary who was also impossibly family. The silver locket felt heavy in his pocket, a reminder of the woman who had given him life, and then given him up to keep him safe. Catherine Hartley had made hard choices, lived through pain and loss, and never stopped loving the son she couldn't keep. Colt promised himself that he would honor her memory by doing this right. Whatever it took, however long it took, he would see justice done for Catherine and for Emma. And maybe, if there was a way, he'd find a path that didn't leave more pain and broken families in its wake. The Hartley birthmark on his wrist seemed to pulse with purpose in the darkness. A mark of family, of resilience, of belonging. For the first time in his life, Colt understood what it meant to truly belong to something larger than himself, and he wasn't going to let it go without a fight. 3 days later, a telegram arrived at the boarding house. Marcus Webb requested their presence at his office immediately. Colt and Emma arrived to find the lawyer looking troubled, several documents spread across his desk. "We have a problem," Webb said without preamble. The injunction was denied. The judge in Wilson County ruled that there's insufficient evidence to prevent transfer of the property while the case is being investigated. "How is that possible?" Emma asked. "We showed them the original deed, the map, everything." The judge is a man named Harold Wickham. According to my sources, he's been on the bench for 15 years and has a reputation for, let's say, flexibility in his interpretations of the law. Webb's tone made his meaning clear. "I suspect Voss has influence with him." Colt felt anger rising, but forced himself to stay calm. "What does this mean for us?" "It means Voss can continue occupying the property and making improvements or changes to it. It also means he can legally evict any squatters, which is how he's characterizing Emma's previous residence there." Webb pulled out another document. "He's filed a formal complaint accusing her of trespassing and theft of property." "That's absurd," Emma said. "It was my home, I know. But we're going to have to prove that in court, and that takes time. Meanwhile, I've received some disturbing information." Webb pulled out a letter, the paper yellowed and stained. "This arrived this morning by courier. It's from a private investigator I hired to look into Catherine Hartley's last years." He handed the letter to Colt, who read it aloud so Emma could hear. The investigator had interviewed people who knew Catherine before she died, including her personal physician and a neighbor who'd been close to her. What emerged was a picture of a woman who had lived in fear, who had been careful about what she said and to whom, who had kept important documents hidden because she didn't trust that they'd be safe in the open. But the most significant discovery was in the letter's final paragraph. The investigator had located a woman named Margaret Hartley, Catherine's younger sister, who had lived on a small farm 20 miles from the main ranch. Margaret was still alive in her late 60s and willing to talk about her sister and the family history. "Catherine had a sister," Emma said. "I never knew that." According to the investigator, Margaret and Catherine were very close, but Thornton didn't approve of the relationship. He tried to keep them apart, didn't want Catherine having any allies or confidants. Webb tapped the letter. "Margaret may have information that could help your case. Letters, documents, or simply testimony about what really happened in the Hartley household. We need to talk to her," Colt said. "That's what I thought. But there's a complication. Margaret lives in Kansas near the property. If you go there, you'll be in Voss's territory, where he has influence and resources. It could be dangerous." "I don't care," Emma said firmly. "If Catherine's sister can help us understand what really happened, we have to try." Webb nodded slowly. "All right, but you'll need to be careful. Travel quietly, don't announce your presence, and get in and out as quickly as possible. I'll arrange for a local deputy I trust to accompany you." The journey to Kansas took 2 days by train and another half-day by hired wagon. The deputy Webb had arranged, a young man named Thomas Beck, met them at the station and drove them out to Margaret Hartley's small farm. The countryside was beautiful in late summer, rolling hills covered in tall grass, creeks winding through valleys, the occasional stand of trees breaking up the endless prairie. Margaret's farm was modest. A small house with a vegetable garden, a chicken coop, and a single barn that had seen better days. An old woman sat on the porch in a rocking chair, a quilt spread across her lap, and even from a distance, Colt could see the resemblance to Catherine in the photograph. The same sharp eyes, the same proud bearing despite age and hardship. When the wagon pulled up, Margaret set aside her quilt and stood, watching them approach with a mixture of caution and curiosity. Emma climbed down first, and when Margaret saw her face, something shifted in the old woman's expression. "My lord," Margaret said softly, "you look just like Catherine did at your age. You must be Emma." "Yes, ma'am. Emma Hartley." "And this is Colt Brennan." Margaret's eyes moved to Colt, studying him carefully. She walked down the porch steps, moving slowly but steadily, and came to stand directly in front of him. She was barely 5 feet tall, and Colt towered over her, but she showed no intimidation. Instead, she reached up and gently touched his face. "Catherine's eyes," she said. "I'd know them anywhere." "You're her boy, aren't you? The one they took from her." "Yes, ma'am." "I believe I am." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "She never stopped looking for you. Every day until she died, she wondered where you were, if you were safe, if you were happy. It broke her heart, giving you up. But Thornton," her voice hardened, "Thornton would have killed you both if she'd tried to keep you. She did what she had to do to save your life. Can you tell us what happened?" Emma asked gently. "We're trying to understand the whole story." Margaret nodded and gestured toward the house. "Come inside. I'll make tea, and I'll tell you everything I know." The inside of Margaret's house was small but comfortable, filled with handmade furniture and quilts, photographs on the walls showing family members spanning decades. She put a kettle on the stove and settled them around a small table near the window. "Catherine and I were close growing up," Margaret began. "Just 2 years apart, always together, always looking out for each other. When she married Thornton Hartley, I was happy for her. He was wealthy, well-respected, and he seemed to care for her. But it didn't take long for the truth to show." She poured tea into mismatched cups and continued. "Thornton was cruel, not always with his fists, though that happened too. Mostly with control, with isolating Catherine from anyone who cared about her, with making her feel worthless and powerless. When she got pregnant, I thought maybe it would change him. But it made things worse." "Why?" Colt asked, Because the baby wasn't his. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma set down her teacup carefully. What do you mean? Margaret's expression was pained. Thornton couldn't father children. Some illness from his youth left him sterile. Catherine didn't know that when she married him. When she got pregnant, she was confused at first, didn't understand how it had happened. Then she remembered a night several months earlier when Thornton's business partner had come to dinner. His name was William Brennan, Colt's breath caught. Samuel's brother. My father's brother. I don't know the details, Margaret said. Catherine only told me once, years later, and even then she could barely speak of it. I think Thornton arranged it somehow, wanted an heir, and decided to get one any way he could. Catherine was... She paused, choosing her words carefully. Catherine was not a willing participant in what happened that night. But a child resulted, and that child was you. The revelation hit Colt like a physical blow. Samuel hadn't just found him on church steps. He'd found his nephew, his brother's son. Had Samuel known? Is that why he'd taken Colt in so readily? Why he'd never tried very hard to find the baby's mother? Samuel must have suspected, Colt said slowly. When he saw me, saw the birthmark, maybe he recognized something of his brother in me. Perhaps, Margaret said. But what matters is that Catherine loved you from the moment you were born. You were hers, regardless of how you came to be. And when Thornton realized the baby wasn't going to give him the control over her that he wanted, when he started threatening to hurt you, she knew she had to get you away. How did she do it? Emma asked. I helped her, Margaret said simply. We planned it together. I took the baby, took you, wrapped you in Catherine's best blanket, and rode through the night to Red Creek. I knew there was a church there, knew it was far enough away that Thornton wouldn't think to look. I left you where you'd be found and cared for, and then I rode back home. You saved my life, Colt said. Catherine saved your life. I just did what she couldn't do herself, because Thornton watched her every moment. Margaret stood and walked to a cabinet, pulling out a wooden box. I've kept something for you. Hoped someday you might come looking for answers. She opened the box and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. Catherine wrote to me every week for 30 years. In these letters she talks about you, about her search, about her hopes and regrets. And there's something else. From the bottom of the box she pulled out another letter. This one sealed with wax and addressed simply, to my son. She wrote this the year before she died, Margaret said, handing it to Colt. She asked me to keep it safe, to give it to you if you ever came looking for her. She said, if you never came, I should bury it with her when I died. But here you are. Colt's hands shook as he took the letter. The paper was thick, expensive, and he could see Catherine's handwriting through the envelope. He looked at Emma, who nodded encouragingly. He broke the seal and unfolded the letter. The writing was elegant but shaky in places, as if written by someone whose hands trembled with age or emotion. He read it aloud, his voice rough with feeling. My dearest son, if you are reading this, then you have found your way back to the family you came from, and my heart is full even though I am not there to see it. I want you to know that giving you up was the hardest thing I have ever done, and not a day has passed that I have not thought of you, wondered about you, prayed for your safety and happiness. You were born of violence, but you were received with love. I held you for 3 precious days before your Aunt Margaret took you away to safety, and in those 3 days I memorized every detail of your face, your hands, the sound of your cry. I sang to you, told you stories, and made you a promise that someday I would find you again. I could not keep that promise, and the grief of that failure has been my constant companion. But I hope that wherever you grew up, whoever raised you, you were loved. I hope you became a good man, strong and kind, the kind of man I knew you would be when I looked into your infant eyes. The birthmark you carry is a gift from my grandmother, passed down through generations of women in our family. It is a mark of resilience, of survival, of the strength it takes to endure hardship and emerge whole on the other side. You carry that strength in your blood. If you have found this letter, you have also found the truth about your birth, about Thornton, about the circumstances of your conception. I want you to know that you are not defined by those circumstances. You are defined by who you choose to be, by the life you build, by the love you give and receive. I have one request, that you help Emma if you can. She is my granddaughter by love, if not by blood, the child of my heart in my final years. The property I worked so hard to protect is meant to be her security, her future. But there are those who would take it from her. If you have it in your power, please stand with her. Please be the family she needs. Know that I loved you every moment of your life, even when I couldn't be with you. Know that you were wanted, cherished, and missed beyond measure. And know that wherever you are, whatever you have become, I'm proud to have been your mother. With all my love, Catherine Margaret Hartley. By the time Colt finished reading, tears were streaming down his face. Emma was crying too, and even Margaret wiped at her eyes with a worn handkerchief. She loved you so much, Margaret said. Sometimes late at night, I'd find her sitting by the window, looking out toward the north where she'd sent you. She'd talk to you as if you could hear her, tell you about her day, ask you questions she knew you couldn't answer. It was like she kept a piece of her heart reserved just for you, waiting for the day you might come back. Colt carefully refolded the letter and placed it in his vest pocket next to the locket. 2 gifts from a mother he'd never known, precious beyond measure. Thank you, he managed to say, for keeping her word safe, for helping her save me, for his voice broke. For everything, Margaret patted his hand. You're a good man. She would have been so proud of you. Now let's talk about how we're going to deal with Clayton Voss and get that property back where it belongs. For the next several hours, Margaret shared everything she knew about the property, about Thornton's business dealings, about the years after his death when Catherine had tried to secure the land for her descendants. She had kept meticulous records, and she pulled out ledgers, receipts, and correspondence that painted a clear picture of Catherine's legal ownership and her intentions for the property's future. Clayton Voss, Margaret said with disgust. He came around several times before Catherine died, demanding recognition as Thornton's son. Catherine didn't dispute his parentage. She knew Thornton had been unfaithful many times, but she refused to give him any claim to the property. She said Thornton had caused enough pain, and she wasn't going to let his legacy continue to hurt people. Do you know how Voss gained control after she died? Emma asked. Fraud, pure and simple. He had someone forge Catherine's signature on a transfer document, claiming she'd sold the property to settle debts. But Catherine had no debts. She was careful with money, always had been. I have her financial records to prove it. Margaret pulled out another stack of papers from a trunk in her bedroom. Bank statements, loan records, payment receipts, all showing Catherine's financial solvency up until her death. Combined with the other evidence they'd gathered, it was damning proof of Voss's fraud. This is enough, Colt said, looking at the mountain of documentation. Webb can take this to court and prove everything, if he gets a fair hearing, Margaret said darkly. Judge Wickham won't give you justice. He's been in Voss's pocket for years. You'll need to appeal to a higher court, maybe go all the way to the territorial Supreme Court. Then that's what we'll do, Emma said firmly. Whatever it takes. As evening fell, Margaret insisted they stay for dinner. She made a simple meal of chicken and vegetables from her garden, and they ate together at the small table, talking about Catherine, about family, about the future. It felt, Colt thought, like what family dinners should be, warm, honest, full of connection and care. Deputy Beck, who'd been keeping watch outside, came in as they were finishing. We should leave soon. I saw riders on the horizon earlier, heading this direction. Might be nothing, but I'd rather not take chances. They gathered all the documents Margaret had provided, carefully packing them into saddlebags. Margaret embraced Emma tightly, then turned to Colt. Come back when this is all settled, she said. Bring Emma and whoever else is family now. We'll have a proper reunion, celebrate Catherine's legacy the right way. We will, Colt promised. They left as the sun was setting, the wagon rolling quickly across the prairie toward the main road. Colt kept looking back, watching for signs of pursuit, his mind racing with everything they'd learned. He had a mother who had loved him, a father, William Brennan, whose name he now knew, an aunt who had risked everything to save him. and a family history that was more complicated and painful than he'd ever imagined. But he also had proof. Documents, letters, testimony, everything needed to fight Voss's claim and restore the property to its rightful heirs. The battle ahead would be difficult, but for the first time, Colt felt they had a real chance of winning. Catherine's letter rested against his heart, a reminder of why this fight mattered, of the love that had brought him into this world, and the love that would see him through the challenges ahead. He touched the birthmark on his wrist and thought of Catherine doing the same, wondering about the son she'd lost. Now he knew her story. Now he could honor her memory by finishing what she'd started. Justice for Catherine, security for Emma, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to heal the wounds Thornton Hartley had inflicted on so many lives. The wagon carried them into the gathering darkness, heading back towards Cheyenne and the legal battle that awaited. But Colt no longer felt he was facing it alone. He had family, by blood, by choice, by the bonds that mattered most, and together they would see this through to the end. The journey back from Margaret's farm should have been routine. They made good time across the prairie, and Deputy Beck kept them moving at a steady pace toward the train station. But as they crossed through a narrow canyon with high rock walls on either side, Beck suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt. "Something's wrong," he said quietly, his hand moving to his sidearm. Colt heard it too, the sound of horses coming from both ends of the canyon. They were trapped. Within moments, riders appeared from both directions, 6 men in total, all armed. Leading them was one of the men who'd come to Colt's cabin in Red Creek, and he was grinning like a wolf who'd cornered his prey. Well, the man said. "Mr. Voss said you might be visiting the old lady. Told us to keep an eye out, make sure you didn't cause any trouble." Beck's jaw tightened. "You're interfering with official business. I'm a deputy from Wyoming. You got no authority here in Kansas. So why don't you just hand over those saddlebags, and we'll let you ride on out of here peaceful-like." "Not going to happen," Colt said, positioning himself between the riders and Emma. The grin faded from the man's face. "We can do this easy or we can do it hard. Makes no difference to me." What happened next came from instincts Colt had hoped he'd left behind. In his years as an Army scout during the Indian Wars, he'd learned to read situations, to recognize when violence was inevitable and when there might be another way. This was inevitable. These men had orders to get those documents, and they weren't leaving without them. "Emma," Colt said quietly, "when I move, you drop to the wagon bed and stay down. Beck, you take the ones on the right." Before anyone could respond, Colt launched himself from the wagon seat. His size and speed took the riders by surprise. He grabbed the nearest horse's bridle, yanking hard and causing the animal to rear. The rider tumbled backward, and Colt caught him before he hit the ground, using his body as a shield. Beck was already firing, his shots precise and controlled. 2 riders on the right side went down, not dead but wounded, and out of the fight. Colt threw his human shield at another attacker, then dove for the fallen man's rifle. The canyon erupted in chaos, horses screaming, men shouting, gunfire echoing off the rock walls. Emma stayed low in the wagon as Colt had ordered, her hands over her ears. The fight was brutal and efficient, Colt moving with the trained precision of a man who'd survived combat before. Within 3 minutes, it was over. 4 of Voss's men were down, 2 had fled on horseback, and the leader was disarmed and on his knees with Beck's gun pressed to the back of his head. Colt walked over, breathing hard, blood on his knuckles from where he'd struck one of the attackers. "Who gave the order?" "Go to hell," the man spat. Beck pressed the gun harder. "Answer the question. Voss wants those documents. Says they're his property, stolen from him. He's willing to pay good money to get them back. And if we hadn't cooperated?" Colt asked. The man's silence was answer enough. These weren't men who'd been sent to negotiate. They'd been sent to take the documents by force and make sure no one talked about it afterward. Colt pulled something from the man's vest pocket, a brass compass, old and well-worn. He opened it and saw an engraving on the inside. "T.H. Thornton Hartley, where did you get this?" Colt demanded. "It was Voss's. He gave it to me for good luck." The man laughed bitterly. "Some good luck?" Colt studied the compass, turning it over in his hands. It was expensive, the kind of thing a wealthy man would carry. The fact that Voss had it, that he'd owned something of Thornton's, lent credence to his claim of being Thornton's son. But it also confirmed something else. Voss was using Thornton's old network, his old methods of intimidation and violence. "Beck, what do we do with them?" Colt asked. "We take them to the nearest sheriff, file charges for attempted robbery and assault." Beck looked at the wounded men. "And we get these ones some medical attention before they bleed out." They used rope from the wagon to bind the prisoners, then loaded the wounded into the wagon bed. It was a slow, tense journey to the next town, every minute filled with the possibility of more attackers. But they made it to the sheriff's office in a small town called Riverside just before midnight. The local sheriff, a grizzled man named Hank Porter, listened to their story with growing concern. "Clayton Voss, you say? That man's trouble has been for years. But he's got connections, lawyers who will have these boys out by morning, even with attempted murder charges." Beck asked. "Even with that?" "Unless you've got proof they were acting on his direct orders, which you don't." Porter shook his head. "Best I can do is hold them overnight, let you get a head start. After that, you're on your own." They spent the night in Riverside's only hotel, taking turns keeping watch. Emma barely slept, jumping at every sound in the hallway. Colt sat in a chair by the window, the brass compass in his hand, thinking about Thornton Hartley and the legacy of violence he'd left behind. "Are you all right?" Emma asked quietly from the bed. "Just thinking about the fight. About how much I hoped I'd left that life behind. I was an Army scout for 8 years, Emma. I saw things, did things." He paused. "I came back to Red Creek looking for peace. But it seems like violence follows some men no matter where they go." Emma sat up. "You protected us today. Those men would have killed us if you hadn't fought back. That's not the same as seeking violence." "Maybe not. But I was good at it, wasn't I? Too good. And part of me—" He stopped, not sure he wanted to say it out loud. "Part of you what?" "Part of me almost enjoyed it. The clarity of it, the simplicity. In a fight, you know exactly what you're supposed to do, who the enemy is, what victory looks like. It's the rest of life that's complicated." Emma came to sit in the chair beside him. "My grandmother's letter said you weren't defined by your circumstances, that you get to choose who you become. Fighting to protect people you care about doesn't make you a violent man. It makes you a good man who knows how to fight when he has to." Colt looked at her, this young woman who'd shown such courage in the face of threat and loss. "You remind me of her, Catherine. Even though you never met her, you have her strength. I hope so." "Because I'm terrified, Colt. Those men today, they were going to kill us. And there will be more, won't there? As long as Voss thinks we're a threat to his claim, probably. Which is why we need to end this quickly. Get those documents to Marcus Webb. Let him file everything with the court before Voss can stop us." They left Riverside at first light, taking a different route to avoid ambush. The train station in the next town was small but busy, and they bought tickets for Cheyenne under false names, mixing in with other passengers to avoid being identified. The journey was tense but uneventful. They arrived in Cheyenne late that evening and went straight to Marcus Webb's office, where they found him working by lamplight despite the late hour. "Thank God you're safe," Webb said when he saw them. "I received word that there was an incident in Kansas. I feared the worst. They laid out everything they'd gathered from Margaret, the letters, the financial records, Catherine's testimony about Colt's birth, and the proof of her clear ownership of the property right up until her death." Webb studied each document carefully, making notes and organizing them into categories. "This is excellent work. With this evidence, we can prove fraud, establish clear chain of ownership, and demonstrate that Voss's claim is based entirely on forged documents." "What about his claim as Thornton's son?" Emma asked. "Does he have any legal right to the property?" "That's more complicated. If he can prove paternity, he might have had grounds to contest Thornton's will. But Thornton died 30 years ago, and Voss never filed a claim at the time. The statute of limitations on inheritance disputes has long since passed. He can't suddenly decide he's owed something 3 decades later, especially when he's using illegal means to pursue it." Colt set the brass compass on Webb's desk. "We found this on one of Voss's men. It belonged to Thornton Hartley, Voss has been using it, which suggests he does have some connection to Thornton's legacy. Webb picked up the compass and examined it. This could actually help us. If Voss has been in possession of Thornton's personal effects, it raises questions about how he obtained them. Catherine's estate should have included all of Thornton's belongings. If Voss took them without legal right, it's another mark against him. So what's our next move? Colt asked. We file everything with the Territorial Supreme Court and request an emergency hearing. Given the evidence of fraud and the violent attempts to suppress that evidence, I believe we can get a hearing within 2 weeks. But Webb hesitated. You need to understand what you're up against. Voss has invested heavily in developing that property. He's brought in mining equipment, hired workers, started extraction operations. He has partners who've put money into the venture based on his claim of ownership. You're saying he'll fight hard to keep it, Colt said. I'm saying he'll fight with everything he has. This isn't just about pride or revenge anymore. It's about money, substantial amounts of it. The mineral rights alone are worth a fortune. Webb looked at them seriously. If you proceed with this, you need to be prepared for a long, difficult battle. And you need to be prepared for the possibility that Voss might do something desperate. We're proceeding, Emma said firmly. This is my grandmother's legacy. I'm not letting it go. Then we fight, Webb said. And we fight smart. I'm going to need you both to write out detailed affidavits about everything that's happened. The ambush in Kansas, the threats, Voss's confession in this office. We'll document every illegal action he's taken. Even if a judge is inclined to be sympathetic to his property claims, attempted murder is harder to overlook. They spent the next several hours writing their statements, recounting every detail they could remember. It was exhausting work, but also clarifying. Seeing everything laid out in writing, the pattern of Voss's behavior became undeniable. As dawn broke over Cheyenne, Webb finally set down his pen. That's enough for now. You both need rest. I'll start filing motions this morning, and I should have news about a hearing date by this afternoon. Colt and Emma returned to their boarding house, but sleep was difficult to find. The events of the past few days played over and over in Colt's mind. The fight in the canyon, Catherine's letter, Margaret's stories, the weight of carrying evidence that could change everything. He pulled out Catherine's letter and read it again, focusing on her words about not being defined by circumstances, about choosing who you become. She'd been talking about his violent conception, but the words applied just as well to the violence he'd committed yesterday. He could choose to be haunted by it, or he could choose to see it as a necessary act of protection, part of being the man Catherine had hoped he would become. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Emma stood in the hallway looking as exhausted as he felt. Can't sleep either, she asked. Too much on my mind. Can we talk? About what happens next? Colt gestured her into the room, and they sat at the small table by the window. Outside, Cheyenne was waking up, people beginning their daily routines, unaware of the legal drama unfolding in their midst. I've been thinking, Emma said, about Voss, about what he said in Webb's office, about being Thornton's son and never getting anything from him. I keep wondering if there's a way to resolve this that doesn't end in more violence. What are you suggesting? I don't know exactly, but Webb said the property's worth a fortune because of the mineral rights. What if we offered Voss a share, not as a legal settlement but as a choice? Recognition that he is part of the Hartley family, even if his father was a terrible man. Colt considered this. You'd be willing to share Catherine's legacy with the man who's been threatening you? I'd be willing to try to end this cycle of pain that Thornton started. My grandmother suffered under his cruelty. You were conceived through violence. Voss grew up rejected and bitter. How many more people have to be hurt by one man's legacy? Emma's eyes were bright with conviction. If we can find a way to acknowledge everyone's pain and work towards something better, shouldn't we try? It was, Colt thought, exactly the kind of thing Catherine might have said. Looking for healing instead of revenge, trying to build something good from the wreckage of the past. It's a generous thought, Colt said, but I'm not sure Voss would accept it. He's gone too far, done too many illegal things. Even if we offered him a fair share, he'd face criminal charges for the fraud and the attacks. Maybe Or maybe if we offered him a way out, a chance to be part of the family instead of fighting against it, he'd take it. People do desperate things when they feel they have no other choice. If we give him a choice, she spread her hands. I'm probably being naive, but I have to try. Colt looked at this young woman who'd lost so much and yet still had room in her heart for compassion. You're Catherine's granddaughter in every way that matters. She'd be proud of you. So you think it's worth trying? I think it's worth bringing up to Webb, seeing if there's a legal way to make such an offer. But Emma, if Voss refuses, if he keeps fighting, we can't let compassion blind us to danger. We have to be prepared to see this through to the end, whatever that means. I know, but at least we'll know we tried to do it Catherine's way. To break the cycle instead of continuing it, later that morning, they presented the idea to Marcus Webb. The lawyer listened thoughtfully, stroking his beard as he considered the implications. It's an interesting proposition, Webb said. Legally, we could structure it as a settlement offer. Acknowledge Voss as a potential heir based on his claimed paternity, offer him a percentage of the property value in exchange for dropping his claim and cooperating with the investigation into the fraudulent documents. The criminal charges would be harder. Those belong to the state, not to you. But if Voss cooperated fully, testified against anyone else involved in the fraud, a prosecutor might be willing to reduce charges. Would he go for it? Colt asked. That depends on how desperate he is and how much he's willing to risk. If he thinks he can win in court, he might refuse. If he realizes the evidence against him is overwhelming, he might see it as his best option. Webb pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. Let me draft something and send it to his attorney. We'll see what happens. 3 days later, the response came. Voss's lawyer rejected the offer outright, calling it an insult and threatening additional legal action if they continued to harass his client. The message was clear. Voss intended to fight until the end. I'm sorry, Webb told Emma. You made a good faith effort, but he's not interested in compromise. Emma nodded, her face set with determination. Then we fight. We take this to court and let justice decide. The hearing date was set for 2 weeks later at the Territorial Supreme Court. In the meantime, Webb filed motions, gathered additional witnesses, and prepared their case. Colt and Emma stayed in Cheyenne, not daring to return to Red Creek for fear of making themselves easy targets. The days were long and filled with anxiety. They reviewed testimony, practiced answering questions Webb thought might be asked, and tried to prepare for every possible argument Voss's lawyers might make. One evening, Colt sat in his room cleaning his father's old revolver, a task that had always brought him comfort. He thought about Samuel, about the life the old blacksmith had given him, about the quiet dignity with which he'd lived. Samuel had never sought conflict, but he'd never run from duty either. Colt touched the birthmark on his wrist and thought about all the people connected by this simple mark. Catherine, who'd loved him enough to let him go. Margaret, who'd risked everything to save him. Emma, who carried the mark as a symbol of the family she'd lost and found again. Even Voss, with his smaller, slightly different version, tied to them all through Thornton's cruel legacy. They were all Hartleys, for better or worse, all connected by blood and circumstance, and the choices they made in response to pain. In 2 weeks, a court would decide who owned the land. But the real question, Colt thought, was bigger than property or money. It was about what kind of legacy they would leave, what kind of family they would choose to be. Catherine had chosen love over bitterness, sacrifice over selfishness. Now it was up to him and Emma to honor that choice, to fight for justice while leaving room for mercy, to seek truth while offering grace. It wouldn't be easy. But nothing worth doing ever was. The compass sat on his table, Thornton's initials glinting in the lamplight. A symbol of the old ways, of control and violence and unresolved pain. Colt picked it up and tucked it into his vest pocket, alongside Catherine's letter and the silver locket. Old ways and new. Pain and healing. Justice and mercy. Somehow, they had to find a way to balance it all. And in 2 weeks, they'd find out if it was possible. The day before the hearing, Marcus Webb received an urgent message requesting their presence at his office immediately. When Colt and Emma arrived, they found the lawyer looking shaken, a sealed document on his desk, and another man sitting in the corner of the room, a stranger with tired eyes and worn traveling clothes. "This is Mr. Benjamin Cross," Webb said. "He's an attorney from Nebraska. He has information that—" Webb paused, seeming to struggle with how to continue. "This changes everything." Cross stood and introduced himself with a firm handshake. "I apologize for the short notice and the timing, but I've been searching for you both for several weeks, and when I heard about the hearing tomorrow, I knew I couldn't wait any longer." "Searching for us?" Emma asked. "Why?" Cross pulled out a leather folder and opened it carefully. 3 months ago, I was retained by the estate executor for a woman named Sarah Pierce. She died in Omaha at the age of 68. In her final instructions, she requested that I locate her biological daughter and inform her of her inheritance. Emma's face went pale. "I don't understand." Sarah Pierce's maiden name was Hartley. "Margaret Hartley." Cross pulled out a birth certificate, yellowed with age. "This is your birth certificate, Emma. Your original birth certificate. The one that shows Margaret Hartley as your mother and lists no father." The room went completely silent. Colt felt the floor shift beneath him as the implications sank in. Margaret, Catherine's sister, was Emma's biological mother. "That's impossible," Emma whispered. "Margaret is alive. We just saw her. She's Catherine's sister, not—" "I believe there's been a confusion of identity," Cross said gently. "The woman you met in Kansas is Margaret Hartley Fletcher, Catherine's younger sister who married a rancher named John Fletcher. Sarah Margaret Hartley never married. She gave birth to a daughter in secret and arranged for that daughter to be adopted by her cousin's family, the family you grew up calling your parents." Cross pulled out more documents, adoption papers, letters, photographs. In one photo, a young woman with dark hair and the same hazel eyes as Emma stood beside Catherine. On her wrist, clearly visible, was the crescent-shaped birthmark. Sarah was Catherine's middle daughter, Cross explained. Born between Catherine's first daughter, who died in infancy, and her son, you, Colt. She was conceived during the same assault that led to your conception. Thornton's business partner, William Brennan, attacked Catherine multiple times during those dark months. Colt felt sick. The violence that had brought him into this world had also created another child, a daughter who'd been hidden away, given a different name. Separated from her mother just as he had been. Why didn't Catherine tell anyone? Emma asked, tears streaming down her face. Why did she hide her own daughter? According to Sarah's letters, Catherine was terrified. Thornton was becoming increasingly unstable, and having a second child by another man would have been dangerous for everyone involved. So Catherine arranged for the baby to be raised by trusted relatives under the name Sarah Margaret, claiming she was a distant cousin's child who needed a home, and Sarah grew up never knowing Catherine was her mother. Colt said quietly, not until Catherine was dying. She finally told Sarah the truth and begged her forgiveness for the years of separation. Sarah understood. She'd seen Thornton's cruelty herself from a distance. They reconciled in Catherine's final weeks. Cross handed the folder to Emma. Sarah asked me to find you because she wanted you to know the truth about who you are. Emma opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were letters from Sarah, written shortly before her death. The first was addressed to my precious granddaughter, Emma read aloud, her voice breaking. My dearest Emma, by the time you read this, I will be gone. But I need you to know the truth about our family, about who you really are and where you came from. Your adoptive parents loved you and raised you well, but they were not your grandparents. I am your grandmother. Catherine Hartley was my mother, which makes her your great-grandmother. The birthmark you carry came from her, passed to me, and then to your mother, my daughter, and finally to you. Your mother was my only child, born to me when I was very young and forced to give her up for adoption, just as my own mother had been forced to give up her son. The man I loved was not free to marry me, and I had no means to support a child alone. So I did what I thought was best. I arranged for her to be adopted by good people who could give her the life I couldn't provide. I have watched you from afar all your life. Emma, I was there at your christening, though you didn't know who I was. I sent money to help with your schooling, though it came through intermediaries. I attended your wedding and wept with joy for your happiness. And when your mother died, I wanted so badly to reveal myself to you, to give you the family connection you'd lost. But I was a coward, afraid of causing you more pain. The property in Kansas is rightfully yours through multiple lines of descent. You are Catherine's great-granddaughter through me. You are also, I recently discovered, connected to another line of the Hartley family. The birthmark doesn't lie, child. You belong to that land and that legacy in ways even I didn't fully understand until it was too late. I have left you everything I have. It isn't much. Just a small house in Omaha, and what savings I managed to accumulate over the years. But more importantly, I leave you the truth. You come from strong women who survived impossible circumstances. Catherine, me, your mother, and now you. We all carry the mark of resilience, and we all carry the burden and gift of the Hartley name. Forgive me for not being braver, for not claiming you as my granddaughter when I had the chance. Know that I loved you from the moment you were born, and I will love you beyond death. You are my legacy, Emma. Make it a good one. By the time Emma finished reading, everyone in the room was crying. The implications were staggering. Emma wasn't just Catherine's adopted granddaughter. She was Catherine's biological great-granddaughter. She had more claim to the Hartley property than anyone had realized, but there was more. Cross pulled out another document, this one a birth certificate for Sarah's daughter, Emma's mother. The space for the father's name had been left blank, but there was a note attached in Sarah's handwriting. James Voss, son of Thornton Hartley and Sarah Voss. He was young and foolish, and I was too, but he loved me in his way. The room went absolutely silent as understanding dawned. Clayton Voss's father, Emma whispered. James Voss was my grandfather. Which makes Clayton Voss your... Cross paused, checking his notes. Your first cousin once removed. You share a great-grandfather in Thornton Hartley, but through different lines. Clayton's father was Thornton's illegitimate son by his mistress. Your grandfather was that same son, James Voss, who later had a relationship with Sarah Hartley, Thornton's biological daughter. Colt's head was spinning. So Emma and Clayton are related by blood? Yes. And more than that, Cross pulled out one final document, a DNA analysis that Sarah had commissioned shortly before her death. Sarah suspected the connection and wanted it confirmed. This test compares Sarah's DNA to a sample taken from Clayton Voss during a court case 5 years ago. It proves that they share a grandfather, Thornton Hartley. But there's something else, Cross continued. The test also revealed something unusual. Sarah's DNA showed markers suggesting her father was not just any man, but someone closely related to Thornton Hartley himself. Webb leaned forward. What are you saying? I'm saying that Catherine's assault wasn't by Thornton's business partner. It was by Thornton's brother. William Brennan was actually William Hartley, Thornton's younger brother, who'd changed his name years earlier after some kind of family falling out. The assault was Thornton's way of punishing his brother and controlling his wife at the same time. The horror of it settled over them. Catherine had been violated by her husband's brother, producing 2 children from those attacks. Colt and Sarah were half-siblings, both victims of the same terrible conspiracy. Samuel knew, Colt said suddenly. That's why he took me in so readily. He wasn't just helping a stranger's baby, he was protecting his brother's son. And he felt guilty, probably, that his brother had done something so terrible. Cross nodded. I suspect you're right. Samuel Brennan, whose real name was Samuel Hartley, took in his nephew and raised him as his son, probably trying to make amends for his brother's crime. Emma sat down heavily. So I'm not just Catherine's great-granddaughter. I'm also... She looked at Colt. We're related through multiple lines. You're my great-great-uncle through Catherine, but also your great-uncle through our father, William, Colt finished. And Clayton Voss is your cousin, which makes him my... He stopped trying to work it out. Nephew, Cross supplied. Very complicated, nephew, but technically that's the relationship. Webb was scribbling notes furiously. This changes the entire legal landscape. Emma's claim to the property is ironclad. She has multiple lines of direct descent from both Catherine and Thornton, and Clayton's claim is also legitimate, though more distant. The property should be divided among all proven heirs, but that's not the most important part, Cross said. The most important part is what this means for Emma's identity. She's not an outsider trying to claim someone else's legacy. She's the most direct heir to both sides of the Hartley family. The property is hers by right, and no court in the territory can deny it. Emma looked at the birthmark on her wrist, then at Colt's, then at the photographs of Catherine and Sarah, 4 generations of women, all carrying the same mark, all survivors of Thornton Hartley's legacy of cruelty. Does Clayton know? Emma asked. Does he know we're related? I don't believe so. The DNA evidence is recent, and I haven't shared it with anyone except the 3 of you. Cross looked at Webb. The question is, what do you do with this information? You could present it in court tomorrow and completely undermine Voss's case. Or we could tell him first, Emma said. Give him a chance to know the truth about who he is, about who we are to each other. Colt looked at her with admiration. Even after everything he's done, you want to give him that? He's family, Emma said simply. Complicated, difficult, dangerous family, but family. And he deserves to know that he's not alone, that he's not just Thornton's bastard son fighting for scraps. He's part of something larger, connected to all of us, whether he likes it or not. Webb shook his head in wonder. Miss Hartley, you continue to surprise me. Most people in your position would use this information as a weapon. You want to use it as a bridge. Catherine wanted to break the cycle of pain, Emma said. This is how we do it. We stop hiding truths, stop treating family as enemies, and start acknowledging that we are all victims of one man's cruelty. Thornton Hartley destroyed lives for his own pleasure and power. We don't have to continue his legacy. Colt stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street below. People were going about their daily lives, unaware of the complex web of family history and pain being unraveled in this office. He thought about Catherine's letter, about her wish for him to help Emma, to be the family she needed. He'd thought that meant protecting her from Voss, but maybe it meant something more. Maybe it meant helping both Emma and Voss find a way to be family to each other. To heal the wounds Thornton had inflicted on all of them. What if we arranged a meeting? Colt said, turning back to face the room. Before the hearing tomorrow. Give Voss a chance to hear this privately, to understand what it means. Then let him choose. Does he want to continue fighting his own family, or does he want to find another way? It's risky, Webb said. He could use the information against you somehow. Or he could simply reject it and proceed with the hearing as planned. But if there's even a chance it could resolve this without more bloodshed, without more pain, we have to try, Emma said. Don't we? Cross gathered his documents. I'll leave this decision to you. But whatever you choose, you should know that Sarah wanted you to have peace, Emma. She felt guilty for not claiming you as her granddaughter while she was alive. She wanted you to know you belonged, that you were loved. That you were never alone, even when you felt you were. After Cross left, the 3 of them sat in silence, processing the magnitude of what they'd learned. The family tree was more complicated than any of them had imagined, tangled with secrets and pain and violence. But it was also full of love. Catherine's love for her children, Sarah's love for her granddaughter, Samuel's love for his nephew, Margaret's love for her sister. We send word to Voss, Colt decided. We ask for a meeting tonight, neutral location, just the 3 of us. We tell him the truth and see what he does with it. Webb nodded slowly. I'll arrange it. But Colt, be prepared for this to go badly. Men like Voss don't always respond well to having their worldview challenged. I know, but we have to try. For Catherine, for Sarah, for Emma, and maybe even for Voss himself, whether he knows he needs it or not. The message was sent, and 3 hours later, a response came back. Clayton Voss agreed to meet them at the Cheyenne Hotel at 8 o'clock that evening. Neutral ground, public enough to discourage violence, private enough for honest conversation. As the appointed hour approached, Colt felt a familiar tension settling into his shoulders, the same feeling he'd had before battles during his army days. Before moments when everything could change in an instant, Emma squeezed his hand. Whatever happens, thank you. For everything. For believing me, for protecting me, for being the family Catherine hoped you'd be. That goes both ways, Colt said. You gave me a mother I never knew. You gave me a history, a purpose, a reason to be more than just a lonely blacksmith in a small town. That's worth more than any property or money. They walked together to the hotel, the evening air cool and clear, stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in this city, Clayton Voss was preparing for a meeting that would reveal truths he'd never expected to hear. The birthmark on Colt's wrist seemed to pulse with significance, a mark of family, of connection, of the blood ties that bound them all together whether they wanted them or not. Tomorrow, a court would decide about property and money and legal rights. But tonight, they would discover if family, complicated, painful, unexpected family, could be stronger than the legacy of violence that had created them all. Colt touched the brass compass in his pocket, Thornton's compass. Tomorrow, he decided, he would give it to Clayton, not as a weapon or a taunt, but as an acknowledgement. They were all carrying Thornton's legacy. The question was what they would choose to do with it, build something new, or destroy each other trying to claim the past. In a few minutes, they'd find out which path Clayton Voss would choose. The private dining room at the Cheyenne Hotel was elegant but understated, with dark wood paneling and a single table set for 4. Marcus Webb had arranged for additional security, 2 trusted deputies stationed outside the door, but they'd agreed the conversation itself would involve only Colt, Emma, Voss, and Benjamin Cross, who would present the evidence. Voss arrived precisely at 8 o'clock, flanked by his own lawyer but leaving the man in the hallway. He entered the room alone, his face carefully neutral, though his eyes darted between Colt and Emma with obvious suspicion. This better not be some kind of trick, Voss said, remaining standing. I've got a hearing tomorrow and I don't have time for games. It's not a trick, Emma said, her voice steady despite the tension in her shoulders. We've learned something about our family history. About your family history. We thought you deserved to know before tomorrow's hearing. Voss's expression didn't change, but he pulled out a chair and sat down. I'm listening. Cross stepped forward and placed his leather folder on the table. Mr. Voss, my name is Benjamin Cross. I'm an attorney from Nebraska, and I've been handling the estate of a woman named Sarah Pierce, formerly Sarah Hartley. Before she died, she commissioned DNA testing and extensive genealogical research into the Hartley family line. What she discovered changes our understanding of how everyone in this room is related. Over the next 20 minutes, Cross methodically presented the evidence: birth certificates, DNA analysis, photographs, letters. He explained Sarah's connection to Catherine, Emma's connection to Sarah, and the complex web of relationships that bound them all together. Voss listened without interruption, his face growing increasingly pale as the implications became clear. When Cross finished, the silence in the room was heavy. So you're telling me, Voss said slowly, that Emma and I are cousins, that we share a great-grandfather in Thornton Hartley, but also that we're connected through James Voss, my father, who had a relationship with Sarah Hartley, who was Thornton's daughter. That's correct, Cross said, and Colt here is Catherine's son, which makes him, Voss paused, working it out, my uncle of some kind. Half-uncle, technically, Cross clarified. You share a grandfather in Thornton Hartley through different lines. Voss looked at the photographs spread across the table, particularly the one showing Sarah with her distinctive birthmark. He slowly pulled up his right sleeve, revealing his own smaller crescent-shaped mark. Then he looked at Emma's wrist, where her mark was clearly visible, and at Colt's. We all carry it, Voss said quietly. The Hartley mark. I always thought it proved I was legitimate, that I deserved recognition. But you're saying everyone at this table has more claim to the Hartley name than I do. No, Emma said firmly. We're saying we all have equal claim. We're all family, Clayton. We're all victims of Thornton's cruelty in different ways. And we're all fighting over land that should belong to all of us. Voss laughed bitterly. Family, that's rich. My whole life I've been the outsider, the bastard son nobody wanted to acknowledge. Now you're telling me I have family, and it's the same people I've been threatening and fighting against." He pushed back from the table. "This doesn't change anything. I still need that land. I've invested everything I have in developing it." "Then develop it with us," Colt said. "Instead of fighting for sole ownership, work with us. Divide the property fairly, acknowledge all the heirs, and build something together instead of tearing each other apart." "You don't understand. I have partners, investors who put money in based on my promise of full ownership. If I go back and tell them I only own a third or a quarter of the property, they'll—" Voss stopped, shaking his head. "They'll destroy me, financially and maybe literally. Who are these investors?" Cross asked. Voss was silent for a long moment. Finally, he pulled out a small brass key from his vest pocket. "This opens a safe deposit box at the First National Bank. Inside are documents showing who really owns the mining operation I set up on the Hartley land. It's not me. I'm just the front man, the one with the Hartley name who could make a claim seem legitimate." "Who is it?" Emma asked. "Senator Harrison Wickham, Judge Harold Wickham's brother." Voss's voice was hollow. "He's been buying up mineral rights across Kansas for years, usually through fraud or intimidation. He found out about the Hartley property, knew it had valuable deposits, and approached me 5 years ago. He said if I could get control of the land, he'd make me a partner. Give me enough money to finally have the life I deserved." "So you forged the deed amendment," Colt said. "Wickham's people forged it. I just signed my name and acted like I was the rightful owner. Catherine was dying, and I thought I could finally claim what Thornton should have left me. I didn't think about Emma, didn't know she existed. By the time she showed up, I was in too deep to back out." Emma leaned forward. "The men who ambushed us in Kansas, were they acting on your orders?" "No. I told Wickham you'd become a problem, that you had evidence that could expose the fraud. He sent his own people to deal with it. I didn't know they'd try to kill you. I swear, I thought they were just going to scare you, maybe destroy the documents." Voss looked genuinely shaken. "When I heard what happened, I realized how far Wickham was willing to go. And I realized I was just another tool to him, expendable if things went wrong." "You could testify," Cross said. "Expose Wickham's involvement. In exchange for cooperation, the prosecutor might be willing to reduce your charges. And then what? Wickham is a United States senator with connections everywhere. Even if he goes to prison, his allies will come after me. I'd be lucky to survive a year." Voss stood and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. "I'm trapped. If I cooperate with you, Wickham destroys me. If I don't, you destroy me in court. Either way, I lose everything." Colt pulled out the brass compass and set it on the table. "I took this from one of your men after the ambush. It belonged to Thornton." Voss turned and looked at the compass, his expression pained. "My father gave that to me the week before he died. Said it was the only thing Thornton ever gave him, passed down as proof he really was a Hartley. I've carried it ever since as a reminder of what I'm owed. What if you're owed something different than you thought?" Colt said. "Not land or money or recognition from a man who was cruel and violent. What if you're owed family? People who understand what it's like to be hurt by Thornton's legacy and are trying to build something better." "It's a nice idea," Voss said. "But it doesn't pay debts or protect me from Wickham." Emma stood and walked over to Voss. Despite the danger he represented, despite everything he'd done, she placed her hand gently on his arm. "We can protect each other. If you testify against Wickham, we can make sure you're safe. The three of us together, with Marcus Webb and Benjamin Cross helping us, we're stronger than you think. And once Wickham is exposed, the property reverts to its rightful owners, all of us. We divide it fairly, we honor Catherine's memory, and we finally end the cycle of pain." Voss looked down at Emma's hand on his arm, and something in his face cracked. "I don't deserve your compassion. I threatened you, chased you, tried to steal from you. You were desperate and manipulated by someone more powerful. That doesn't excuse what you did, but it explains it." Emma's voice was gentle but firm. "My great-grandmother Catherine survived Thornton's abuse. My grandmother Sarah survived being separated from her mother. Colt survived being abandoned as a baby. We've all survived things we shouldn't have had to. Now we can choose. Do we keep hurting each other or do we survive together? The silence stretched out, broken only by the sound of carriages passing in the street below. Colt watched Voss struggle with the decision, saw decades of bitterness and anger warring with the tentative hope that maybe, finally, he could belong somewhere. "If I agree," Voss said slowly, "if I testify against Wickham and work with you instead of against you, what happens to my claim? Do I get anything?" "You get a fair share," Colt said. "We present all the evidence to the court, establish everyone's rightful claim, and let the judge decide how to divide the property. It might be thirds, might be different percentages based on the strength of each claim. But whatever it is, it will be legal and honest. And you get family," Emma added. "You get to stop being alone, stop fighting, stop carrying all this anger. That has to be worth something." Voss closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, they were wet with tears. "I'm tired. I've been fighting my whole life, trying to prove I'm worth something, trying to force people to acknowledge me. And for what? To end up a criminal working for another man who sees me as expendable?" He looked at Emma, then at Colt. "Catherine really wrote that letter? The one you showed me in Webb's office?" "Every word," Colt said. "She wanted all her descendants to share equally. That includes you, Clayton. You're Thornton's grandson through James. You're part of this family whether you knew it or not." Voss picked up the compass and turned it over in his hands. "My father told me Thornton was a great man. Powerful, respected, someone to aspire to. I believed that for years. But he wasn't great, was he? He was a monster who hurt everyone around him." "Yes," Colt said simply. "But we don't have to be like him. We can choose different. We can build something better on the ruins of what he destroyed." "All right," Voss said finally. "I'll do it. I'll testify against Wickham, turn over all the documents, cooperate fully. And in exchange," he looked at Emma and Colt, "I get to be part of the family, part of something that doesn't involve lies and violence and betrayal." Emma smiled through her tears. "You get to be part of something good." Cross immediately began taking notes. "We'll need to contact the marshal's office tonight, get you into protective custody before Wickham realizes you've turned. We'll also need to secure the safe deposit box and any other evidence you have." "There's more," Voss said. "Records of other properties Wickham has acquired through fraud. Names of judges and officials he's paid off. If you want to bring him down completely, I can give you everything." Webb, who had been listening quietly from the corner, stepped forward. "This changes tomorrow's hearing entirely. Instead of a property dispute, it becomes a criminal investigation. The property will be frozen until the fraud investigation is complete, which could take months. But Emma will be safe," Colt said. "And the property will eventually be returned to its rightful owners." All of us. They spent the next several hours working out the details. Voss was taken into protective custody by federal marshals. The safe deposit box was secured, revealing documents that implicated Senator Wickham in fraud schemes involving dozens of properties across 3 territories. Cross and Webb worked through the night, preparing legal documents that would shift the case from civil dispute to criminal prosecution. As dawn approached, Colt and Emma found themselves alone in Webb's office, exhausted but also strangely hopeful. Everything had changed in the span of a few hours. They'd gone from adversaries with Voss to family, from victims of Thornton's legacy to architects of something new. 6 months had passed since the trial, and spring had come to Kansas with its promise of renewal and growth. Colt, Emma, and Clayton stood together at the gate of the Hartley Ranch, looking at the property that had been at the center of so much conflict and was now the foundation of their shared future. The ranch house still stood proud and white, its columns gleaming in the morning sun, though it needed repairs and fresh paint. The land stretched out in all directions, 2,000 acres of rolling prairie dotted with cattle and wildflowers. It was beautiful, and it was home. The special master appointed by Judge Morrison had completed his work. The property was divided equally among the 3 heirs, but rather than physically splitting the land, they'd chosen to hold it jointly, managing it together as partners and family. The mineral rights had been developed carefully and ethically, providing income that funded both their lives and the ongoing work of the Catherine Hartley Justice Fund. They'd buried Thornton's compass at Catherine's grave the previous week, laying it to rest alongside the pain and violence it represented. In its place, they'd each contributed something to a small memorial they'd built near the ranch house, a stone marker engraved with Catherine's name and dates, surrounded by flowers that bloomed in the same colors as the blanket Colt had been wrapped in as a baby. Today was special. Margaret Hartley Fletcher was coming for dinner, along with May from Red Creek, Doc Harrison, Sheriff Ridley, and Marcus Webb. It would be the first true family gathering, a celebration of everything they'd built and overcome. Emma worked in the kitchen, preparing Catherine's favorite dishes from recipes Margaret had provided. The house smelled of bread baking and roast cooking, of home and comfort and love. Through the window she could see Colt and Clayton repairing the porch railing, working side by side with an ease that would have been unimaginable 6 months ago. "How are you holding up?" Margaret asked, coming to stand beside Emma at the counter. The older woman had become a frequent visitor, filling the grandmother role Emma had always longed for. "I'm happy," Emma said simply. "For the first time in longer than I can remember, I'm genuinely happy. I have family, I have purpose, I have a future. I keep waiting for something to go wrong, but nothing does." "That's what happens when you build on the right foundation," Margaret said. "Catherine built on fear and secrets because she had to. But you three have built on truth and love. That's a foundation that lasts." Outside, a wagon pulled up carrying May and the others from Red Creek. The reunion was joyful and loud, with embraces and laughter and stories shared. May inspected every corner of the ranch house, declaring it needed a woman's touch but had good bones. Doc Harrison examined everyone to make sure they were eating properly and getting enough rest. Sheriff Ridley regaled them with news from Red Creek, where Colt's smithy stood empty, waiting for his eventual return. "The town misses you," Ridley said to Colt as they stood on the porch. "When are you coming home?" "I am home," Colt said, gesturing to the ranch, to Emma and Clayton inside. "But Red Creek will always be part of me. I'm thinking of spending summers there, winters here. Keep the smithy running, maintain the cabin, stay connected to the place that raised me." "Samuel would like that," May said, joining them. "He always said a man should have roots in multiple places. Makes him harder to uproot when storms come." The photographer they'd hired arrived in the afternoon, a serious man with elaborate equipment, who positioned them carefully in front of the ranch house. Emma stood in the center, wearing a dress the color of prairie grass. Colt stood to her right, tall and strong in his Sunday best. Clayton stood to her left, his expression still somewhat guarded, but softening with genuine affection. Margaret, May, and the others joined them for a larger group portrait, everyone arranged on the porch and steps, a true family gathering captured for posterity. "Show your wrists," the photographer suggested. "I heard about the birthmarks. That would make a powerful image." They looked at each other and smiled. Together, Emma, Colt, and Clayton raised their right wrists, displaying the crescent-shaped marks that connected them across time and tragedy. The photographer captured the image, and in that frozen moment they were forever bound, not by pain or loss, but by choice and love, and the future they'd decided to build together. Dinner was a feast spread across the long table that had once hosted Thornton's business associates and now held a very different kind of gathering. They ate and talked late into the evening, sharing stories about Catherine and Sarah and Samuel, about the families the Justice Fund had helped, about plans for the ranch and the future. Clayton shared that he'd been courting a widow from town, a kind woman with 2 young children who'd lost her husband in a farming accident. "She knows everything about my past," he said, "the fraud, the violence, all of it, and she's willing to give me a chance anyway. Says everyone deserves the opportunity to be better than they were." "That's wonderful," Emma said, genuinely delighted. "When do we get to meet her?" "Soon. She's cautious, wants to make sure I'm serious about changing before she introduces me to her children. I respect that. It makes me work harder to prove I'm worthy of their trust." "You are worthy," Colt said firmly. "You made mistakes, but you owned them, and you're making amends. That's what matters." As the evening wound down and guests began preparing to leave, Margaret pulled Emma aside. "I have something for you. Something Catherine asked me to keep safe until the right time." She handed Emma a small wooden box, worn smooth with age. Inside was a collection of letters, all addressed to "my son," in Catherine's elegant handwriting, dated across 30 years. She wrote to Colt every year on his birthday, Margaret explained. Letters she never sent because she didn't know where to send them, but she wanted him to have them someday, to know she never forgot him, never stopped loving him. Emma carried the box to Colt, who'd stepped outside to watch the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and amber. She handed it to him without words, and he opened it with shaking hands. Together, they sat on the porch steps and read the letters by lamplight. Catherine's words spanned from despair to hope, from guilt to acceptance, from loss to peace. She wrote about her daily life, about changes on the ranch, about her hopes for the son she'd lost. And in the final letter, written just months before her death, she wrote about forgiveness, for Thornton, for herself, for the circumstances that had torn them apart. "I pray that wherever you are loved," Catherine had written. "I pray that you've had a good life, that you've known kindness and joy, that you've become the man I saw in you when you were just hours old. And I pray that someday, somehow, you'll understand why I had to let you go. Not because I didn't love you, but because I loved you too much to let you be destroyed by the evil that surrounded me. You were my hope, my precious boy. You were the good that came from darkness, and even though I couldn't keep you, you kept me going. The thought of you out there somewhere living and growing and becoming yourself gave me strength when I had nothing else. Thank you for that gift, even though you never knew you were giving it." Colt couldn't read the last paragraphs through his tears. Emma finished for him, her own voice thick with emotion. When she was done, they sat in silence, the weight of Catherine's love settling over them like a blessing. "She really did love me," Colt said finally. "All those years, even when I didn't know she existed, she loved me. And now you know," Emma said. "Now you have her words, her testimony of that love. It's not the same as having her here, but it's something. It's real." Inside the house, Clayton was helping clean up, laughing at something May said, looking more relaxed and genuine than Colt had ever seen him. Through the window, they could see Margaret showing Webb photographs from Catherine's life, both of them smiling at memories shared. "We did it," Emma said softly. "We honored Catherine's legacy. We broke Thornton's cycle of violence. We created something good from all that pain." "Catherine did it," Colt corrected gently. "She planted the seeds with her love and sacrifice. We just helped them grow. The stars were emerging now, bright and clear in the vast Kansas sky. Somewhere to the north was Red Creek, the town that had raised Colt and given him his first home. Somewhere in the past were Catherine and Sarah and Samuel, their love and sacrifice creating the foundation for this moment. And somewhere in the future were children not yet born who would inherit this land and this legacy of choosing love over hate, healing over revenge, family over isolation. The birthmark on Colt's wrist caught the lamplight, and he thought about all the people who'd carried this mark. Catherine, Sarah, Emma, even Clayton in his own way. A mark of resilience, Margaret had said. A mark of survival. A sign that the Hartley family, despite everything, endured. But it was more than that now. It was a mark of hope, of transformation, of the possibility that even the deepest wounds could heal if given time and care and love. "Should we go back inside?" Emma asked. "I think May is cutting the pie in a minute. I just want to sit here a little longer, take it all in." Colt looked at the ranch house, at the land stretching out in all directions, at the family gathered inside. "I spent 32 years wondering where I belonged. Now I know I belong here. With you, with Clayton, with all of this. I'm home." Emma leaned her head against his shoulder. "We're all home. Finally." They sat together as night fell completely and the house behind them filled with lamplight and laughter. Inside, family waited. Outside, the land that had caused so much conflict now represented peace. and above, the stars shone down on three people who'd found each other against all odds and chosen to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of the past. The Hartley legacy would endure, not as a story of violence and loss, but as a testament to the power of love, to heal even the deepest wounds, to bridge even the widest gaps, to transform even the darkest inheritance into something worth passing on. Catherine's dream had come true. Her son had found his way home. Her family was together. And the land she'd fought so hard to protect was safe in the hands of people who would honor it, cherish it, and use it to do good in the world. Some journeys take a lifetime. Some answers come too late. But sometimes, just sometimes, love is strong enough to reach across time and death itself, to guide the lost home, to turn strangers into family, and to prove that no sacrifice made for love is ever truly wasted. Colt pulled out Catherine's letter and read the final line one more time. "You were my hope, my precious boy." And now, looking at Emma beside him and Clayton, visible through the window, and the family gathered in the house that Catherine had once called home, Colt understood what Catherine had meant. Hope doesn't die with the person who holds it. It transforms, passes on, becomes the courage of the next generation to keep going, keep loving, keep believing that tomorrow can be better than today. They were Catherine's hope, made manifest, and they would carry that hope forward into whatever future awaited together as family, as the living proof that love, real, chosen, deliberate love, is the strongest force in the world. The story that began with a birthmark and a stranger's desperate plea ended here, on a Kansas ranch under starlight, with a family that had been torn apart by violence and brought back together by grace. It ended with peace, with purpose, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing they'd honored the past while building something better for the future. It ended, as all good stories should, with hope, and with love, and with the simple, profound truth that we are all exactly where we belong, when we choose to belong to each other. Colt and Emma rose from the porch steps and went inside to join their family, carrying Catherine's letters like the precious treasures they were, ready to share them with the people who would help carry this legacy forward. The door closed behind them, and through the window, warm light spilled out onto the prairie, a beacon of home and belonging in the darkness. And somewhere, in whatever place the spirits of the departed dwell, Catherine smiled,